Number 10. Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Once a bustling town with more than 16,000 inhabitants, Chernobyl in northern Ukraine was the site of one of the world's worst ever nuclear incidents in 1986. On April 26 that year, the nearby nuclear power plant was conducting a systems test on its fourth reactor, but something went terribly wrong. There was a sudden surge of power, and the emergency shutdown was initiated. A further surge happened and triggered a series of explosions. The core of the reactor became exposed and caused a fire that sent a plume of highly radioactive smoke into the atmosphere. This plume drifted across large parts of the Soviet Union and across Europe and turned Chernobyl into a wasteland. Today, there's a 19-mile or 30-kilometer exclusion zone around the reactor to prevent people from coming into contact with the dangerous parts that will take hundreds, if not thousands of years to fully recover. It is one of the most radioactive areas in the world and draws scientists and tourists from all over, although the time you can spend there is limited. The town was abandoned in such haste that you can still see shoes, cups, and toys where they were left in the panic, and the Chernobyl Fairground, which was due to open a few days after the incident, lays in ruins, having never been used. There's one unexpected positive to the evacuation, though, and that's the effect it's had on the local wildlife. Species now roam free, and even rare birds have increased their numbers in the area. Tests are regularly carried out to see if the local fauna is being affected by the radiation, and while levels are present, it's not affecting animal populations. In fact, they're thriving, which just goes to prove a pretty stark reality. The presence of humans has a far more detrimental effect on animal habitats than even a nuclear disaster does. It's pretty eye-opening. Number 9. Porton Down. Porton Down is probably the most famous government facility in the UK, but even though its existence has been officially acknowledged, the projects that take place there remain the most secretive that the country's involved in. It was first opened in 1916 in response to the new chemical weapons being used by the Germans on the battlefields of the First World War, and soon started looking for ways to defend against them and to create new ones of their own. In the time since, the operations at Porton Down have been scaled up and down depending on how government policy and the threats being faced around the world, and it's now only home to classified military research labs. But it's also the country's health authority, and several private companies are there too. What's known about the experiments that have taken place there is that between 1949 and 1989, as many as 20,000 people took part in various trials, and it was also the place where VX nerve gas was first developed in 1952. Also involved in the creation of CS gas, and now where samples are some of the world's most dangerous pathogens, such as Ebola, anthrax, and the plague are kept. You can wonder about what still takes place behind those secretive walls, and why things are just being kept as secret as they always have been. Who knows? Number 8. Heard Island, Australia. Despite falling under the jurisdiction of Australia, Heard Island is one of the most remote places on Earth, lying around 2,547 miles or 4,099 kilometers to the southwest of Perth, and about 2,600 miles or 4,200 kilometers to the southeast of South Africa and the Indian Ocean. It's Heard Island, along with the surrounding McDonnell Islands, that you'll find Australia's only 2 active volcanoes, and one of them, Mawson Peak, is the tallest mountain in Australia, reaching an elevation of 9,006 feet, or 2,745 meters. Because of where the islands are, they're also covered in 41 separate glaciers and are home to a wide range of different plant and animal species. Although they're volcanic in origin, they're made up of mainly limestone and scattered pieces of other rocks. And this means they're relatively fragile compared to most other islands, and this is why the Australian government forbids visitors from going there. There are some parts of the island that have never been seen by a person before, and the government wants to keep it that way in order to preserve it. Of course, this is a place that's so remote that there's virtually no chance that anyone would reach Heard Island without it being their specific destination. So, with the rules in place, there have been fewer voyages to investigate the islands in the past half-century that have been sent to the moon. Number 7. The Siachen Glacier. There are some places in the world that militaries take far more interest in than you would expect, but perhaps the most mysterious of these is the Siachen Glacier. It's located within the eastern Karakoram mountain range and lies on the border between India and Pakistan. But despite being officially under Indian control, the two countries have fought over it since the 1970s. The 47-mile-long glacier ranges in elevation between 18,875 feet above sea level to about 11,875 feet, and sees temperatures at certain times of the year plummet as low as -58 degrees Fahrenheit or -50 degrees Celsius. These treacherous conditions haven't stopped it from being known as the highest battleground on Earth, and to enable their control over the glacier, it's believed that the Indian military has built a subglacial base to support the troops that patrol the surface. Just how vast this base isn't known, but there have been estimates that the Indian Army's presence produces as much as a ton of waste per day, which is being dumped on the glacier. It's also known that India has installed large networks of oil pipelines throughout the glacier to supply outposts and camps, as well as using chemical blasting to change the landscape to their needs, which is causing severe environmental consequences for the surrounding area. All of this activity, however, causing the glacier to retreat at a far greater rate than ever before. So even if there's no official confirmation of the base, we'll probably all know for sure by 2035, at which time the glacier is only expected to be around a fifth of the size it was in 2011. Number 6. Niihau Island, United States. The westernmost and 7th largest island in the Hawaiian archipelago is known as Niihau, and it covers an area of 69.5 square miles, or about 180 square kilometers. It's 17.5 miles, or 28.2 kilometers to the southwest of Kauai. Now, despite being a lush wetland region that's as beautiful as the rest of Hawaii, you won't find any resorts to stay in there. And the closest you'll get to it is half-a-day helicopter tour to see the island from a distance. That's because of an unusual political agreement that means only people authorized by the island's owners are allowed to go there, and they're notoriously restrictive with who they welcome. The island was sold to Elizabeth Sinclair by the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1864 for $10,000, which is the equivalent to around 170 grand today. And it's her descendants, the Robinsons, who are still in charge. Only members of the family and their relatives, along with U.S. Navy personnel, government officials, and the occasional invited guest are allowed on the island. And this has allowed for the development of a community that's detached from the outside world. Now, this doesn't mean that they have nothing to do with anyone else, though, and they've had a long-standing relationship with the U.S. military, to the point where there's a small installation on the island, and it's also occasionally used as a site for specialist training operations. There are now believed to be around 170 residents on the island, and after building an economy that was mainly sustained by farming, they are all virtually self-sufficient. No rent has to be paid by residents, and meat is free to everyone that lives there. All electricity is provided by solar power, and there are no vehicles, with islanders instead relying on horses for their transport. Number